I've said it before and I'll say it again, in litigation, sometimes even when you win,
you still lose.
Viva Frei, Montreal litigator turned YouTuber, and it's going to be a bit of a toned-down vlog because I've got a kid sleeping in the back. So the big news coming out of The Hague this week was what seemed to be a favorable judgment of the courts declaring the curfew in the Netherlands to be illegal, not necessarily unconstitutional, but just illegal for reasons I'm going to explain in a few seconds. In what was apparently something of a surprise decision, the lower court declared the curfew to be illegal. It was a smashing success for constitutional rights. People were rejoicing in the streets, and lo and behold, by the end of the day, the order itself was suspended, pending a hearing on the appeal, which was scheduled for Friday of the same week. The stay of the judgment really didn't come as anything of a surprise for anybody who knows how the legal system works. Sometimes even when you win, you still lose. Now, before we get into explaining what exactly happened here, and full disclosure, I have not read the original decision itself because my Dutch is a little rusty in that I don't understand a word of Dutch, except one word. But before we get into explaining what happened, one interesting thing to note here, this judgment is coming out of a court in The Hague, and I'm not sure if it is The Hague or just a court in The Hague. Interesting fact, the Netherlands is one of a few countries that actually has two capitals. One capital is Amsterdam, but the other capital is The Hague, where they have the International Court of Human Rights, and they have another court that declared this curfew illegal. The Netherlands is another country that effectively has two capital cities. According to the Constitution, Amsterdam is the capital city, but the Parliament and the Dutch government have been in The Hague for hundreds of years, giving that location the functions of capital city. The Hague is also the headquarters of many important international governmental agencies, such as the International Criminal Court. I had to record this somewhere else other than in my car, which is why the audio sounds a little different right now. Back to the vlog. Sorry about the audio. The second thing that is interesting before we get into explaining what exactly happened is how the media spun this decision. The headlines that the media ran with would let you think that absolute chaos was ensuing in the Netherlands. BBC News. COVID. Dutch crisis as court orders end to curfew. Don't you just love the way mainstream media is spinning this now? The idea that people might actually be allowed out of their houses at night is itself declared a crisis. Heaven forbid the people of free countries should be allowed out of their houses at night. It is a crisis, the fact that this court declared a curfew unlawful. Curfew which in the Netherlands has not been declared since the Second World War. It is not a court recognizing fundamental human rights, it is a crisis in the Netherlands. Moving on to the decision itself. The Hague, Netherlands. A Dutch court ordered the government Tuesday to end the curfew it imposed last month to rein in the spread of the coronavirus, saying the ruling coalition was not entitled to use emergency powers to impose the restrictive measure. However, an appeals court later said the curfew would remain in force at least until a ruling on the government's appeal of the lower court's decision. A hearing is scheduled for Friday. Prime Minister Mark Rutte urged the public to continuing staying home during the 9 p.m. to 4:30 a.m. curfew hours pending the result of the appeal, saying the curfew, quote, is a means, not an end, end quote. Oh, we all understand that the curfew is a means. The only question is a means to what? A means to what end, and when is that end going to come? But setting that aside, the question as to why the curfew was declared illegal in the first place is actually very interesting, and it's something we've already seen in other jurisdictions. Now, this particular article didn't really flesh out the legalities of what happened. I had to read a few other articles in order to really understand, but ultimately the curfew was not declared unconstitutional in and of itself. It was just declared unlawful because the emergency powers used to enact the curfew were the wrong sort of powers to use. From an article in a publication called The Spectator. Police were ready and supermarkets closed their doors, but on Tuesday evening it was unclear if a controversial curfew in the Netherlands would be respected. Earlier in the day, a court ruled that the legal basis for the curfew was invalid. It rests on a particular type of emergency ruling when instead it should have gone to a vote in the lower house. This was, ruled the court in The Hague, quote, absolutely not, end quote, the kind of situation for which the emergency law was intended, such as the breach of a dike. Meanwhile, the court said the 9 p.m. to 4:30 a.m. curfew, which sparked nationwide hooliganism and riots after it was introduced in late January, constituted an, quote, extreme breach, end quote, of freedoms enshrined in Dutch law. The legal rationale here is not that the curfew is necessarily unconstitutional in and of itself, it's just that it cannot be imposed through these emergency measure acts. It has to go through the proper channels of government in order to be approved as a law. It is the same rationale that was successfully invoked in Michigan when Governor Whitmer was basically using the Emergency Powers Acts to continually enforce emergency measures month over month when they were only supposed to be extended for 30 days. After that, they would have to be approved in the ordinary legislative process. It is the same rationale that was invoked by a Gatineau lawyer in Quebec who sued the government to declare unlawful or unenforceable the curfew that has been imposed here, except the Quebec court did not retain that lawyer's argument. But the overarching idea here is that when a government invokes the Emergency Measures Act, typically it has to be for a limited period of time, and typically by law it is for a limited period of time, and it sort of does not enable them to do whatever they want, whenever they want, for however long they want. So once you are beyond the scope and application of whatever is the Emergency Powers Act in your particular jurisdiction, typically you need to go get those restrictions approved through the normal legislative process, which was not done in this case. So the court in The Hague said that this curfew was unlawful or illegally implemented in virtue of the Emergency Act that they used to justify invoking it, that it had to go through the normal legislative process, and until that time, it is unlawful and it should not be enforced. Except in the same day, the government, which has endless resources, filed an appeal, got a judgment suspending the execution of that lower court judgment pending an appeal of that decision. So although they won, they then lost, but they still nonetheless won, and this is what certain people had to say about the decision. Mordecai Crispin, an activist for protest groups including Virus Warhide and Heart for Freedom, Hart voor Vrijheid, said he hoped that the court ruling would alert voters to the freedoms slipping through their fingers. Quote, "It is appalling that the caretaker government has continued to rule and imposed a curfew," end quote, he told me. Good, trusting people have been completely cheated by this government in the belief that the rules are correct, while 14,000 fines of €95, 83 pounds have been handed out where there is no legal basis for them. The collateral damage is so much larger than the damage they are trying to limit, end quote. My favorite part about this paragraph, the Heart for Freedom, the Hart voor Vrijheid. Now, many of you might not know that my real name is David Freiheit, and Freiheit in German means freedom, and it's good to know in Dutch, freedom, Freiheit, looks and sounds about the same, Vrijheid. Alright, but enough about me, back to the vlog. Rutte, meanwhile, called on Dutch citizens to respect the spirit of the curfew as the latest coronavirus figures showed a slight rise in infections week on week. Quote, "The judge's verdict this morning is, of course, a setback," he said in a press conference. "If the legal basis for the curfew is wrong right now, that does not mean it is not necessary. The curfew is a means to an end, not an end in itself. The goal is to keep the coronavirus under control as much as possible so that soon we will get all our freedoms back in a safe way. That is why we implemented the curfew, and that hasn't changed," end quote. They are working on getting your freedoms back in a safe way, and I think a great many people out there are saying, what on earth does that possibly mean? Others might look at that statement itself and consider that to be the most dangerous thing out there. So that is the recap. A civil rights victory, followed by something of a loss, followed by a to be continued. We will see what happens on appeal, but like Mordecai Crispin said, at the very least now, perhaps people are getting a little more sensitized to the fact that their freedoms are slipping through their fingers if they haven't hit the ground already. Ronald Reagan famously said that the 9 most terrifying words in the English language are "I'm from the government and I'm here to help." Well, I think we have a close second with what Rutte said, in that we are trying our best to get you your freedoms back as safely as possible. Call me a free radical, but I happen to think that the government taking your freedoms away in the first place is the greatest risk. And with that said, if you like my videos, you like my content, please be sure to like, share, subscribe, hit the notification bell, drop a comment in the comment section below because it feeds the algorithm. Victory is mine! If you want to support the channel, all of the support links are in the pinned comment, but the best and freest way to support the channel is just to share it around with everyone you know. Robert Barnes and I have a page on Locals. It is called vivabarneslaw.locals.com. I am also on Rumble, but more important than any of that, take care of yourselves, check in on friends and family, and make sure everyone around you is doing well, especially in times of curfew, and now you know your vlog. Peace out.